Derech Mitzvosecha. Issur Sinas Yisroel, Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel. Prohibition to hate another Jew and the mitzvah to love another Jew. We learned from the Sefer Chinuch that you shall not hate your brother in your heart, because that will be the source of all wills. And even it's not just about hating in the heart, also negative behaviors are still prohibited because there's other prohibitions that are violated by that. Don't hate your brother in your heart and don't treat them in sort of kind of ways. Mitzvah Ahavas Yisroel, loving another Jew, is down to the soul level, and all manner of good behaviors will come from that. When the potential convert came to Hillel and said, "Teach me the whole Torah on 1 foot," he said, "What is hateful to you, don't do unto others." That's the whole Torah. The rest of the commentary, go study it. How can we say that the entire Torah is boiled down to this one mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel? Especially because it doesn't affect my mitzvahs with God. Saying that, though, it seems that maybe it does somehow, because before you daven, you're supposed to say Hareini. Hareini is, I accept upon myself the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. Not just that, it'll make your davening more successful. Also, we see that there's an element of Ahavas Yisroel coming to other places, because we see that Rizal would say confession, even though he himself didn't need the confession. He would say confession for the collective, because there's a measure that we are responsible for each other. Which brings us to the idea that Adam, the first man, was a neshama klalis, which is an all-encompassing soul. That we all come from Adam, and in the shape of man, then our souls are all being drawn from different limbs of this body. Looking at it just from a human perspective, between peoples of the world, the great leaders of the generation will be more like the head souls, and everybody else is just different limbs to follow. And then we can look at just the people themselves being part of this body, and God is the source of all of this, higher even than the head soul, initial spark in the father's brain, etc. When a person, Adam, acts as he's supposed to, then this name Adam is a name of praise for him, that Adam Elel, and I'll be like the one above. You're being godlike in your behaviors, in your pursuits right now. If not, God forbid, that it's like Adam is like Adama. We correlate the name of Adam, which has a gematria of 45, or the word of Adam, which has a gematria of 45, with a dimension of God's name of Avaya, which is Ma, which is also 45. So we look at the way that Ma operates within the world, and that's kind of how we're supposed to be operating also. Because Ma is taking the idea that you have a central starting point of everything. You say God's essence, etc. Then it comes down, if you remember, we have the level of Adam Kadmon, which you saw in the previous Maamar, which is God seeing all of existence in one glance. And basically, God seeing it is what creates it, but God sees everything at one time. And then from there, remember, we have to break down the steps. So initially, we're starting off from an essence, wholeness, simplicity. There's not parts within the wholeness, simplicity. There's not parts within the essence, but the potential for all the parts are within it. So even though eventually everything is going to become individualized and particularized, to go back high enough, everything is still coming from the same place. So what eventually comes is somehow rooted in the original source, even if we don't necessarily see it there. It's kind of like also, we said from the last Maamar, like the initial moment of conception of a child, there's that DNA packaging, anything can be anything at that point. The baby eventually will form, baby's going to become a child, becomes an adult. Even if something manifests later within the adult, it ultimately has to trace back to that original DNA packaging. You could say, like, oh, this triggered this or this triggered that, but you don't necessarily manifest or develop something that's not already in potential within you, which goes all the way back to the original DNA. So here, God essence, God is going to give the capacities for the world to be created. There's different formats of it, but the format of Ma versus the world of Tohu, where everything was too bright, it couldn't interrelate with each other, so it was all separate. But the world of Tikkun is the world where there's interrelation. That comes about through the name of Ma, allows this interrelation of the different attributes. They all contain each other, but ultimately they're also all source within the oneness. That's kind of us. We all think that we're separate entities, but ultimately we're interrelated entities, all coming from an original oneness. And that brought us to the Tikkun Ezra, they said with Eliyahu Navi. Pasach Eliyahu, that Eliyahu stood up in the higher realms, and he said to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the Rashbi, and to his colleagues, he spoke about God operating within the world, and he revealed a lot of secrets to them. And Eliyahu Navi describes how this format of Ma works within the world. They have an original oneness, that God is not compelled by the attributes. He creates the attributes through which he operates within the world. He is not compelled by them. He is not defined by them or anything like that. Instead, these attributes are like a body to God, and the worlds are like the clothing that the body wears. So the same way that there's you, and you are in a body. The body is you, but it's also not you, because the body is not the real you. The real you is your soul, the essence of you, which is not actually your body, but it's still your body. So it's you, but also not you at the same time. It's an expression of you. Like we've said many times before, the soul needs the body to operate within the world. Your body, which is you, which is not you, but your body's how the soul interfaces with the world. There's no communication between your soul and the world without some sort of form, but the body is, and that interacts with the world. Now that body can wear many different clothings. The clothing doesn't change you. It presents you in certain sorts of ways. It gives you a certain sort of form according to what you're wearing. It will give you a certain kind of look. It's definitely not you, because clothing you could take off, put on, you could change your style, anything like that. It is a sort of presentation of yourself, but it's definitely not yourself. Definitely less than the body is, and definitely going back to the soul, which is the core essence of you. The way you were to relate, God's essence is kind of like the soul within us. It's the real God. That's something that's a whole simplicity essence thing that can't fully comprehend, because God has chosen to interface with the world. He made a quote-unquote body for himself. And what is the body that he made for himself are these attributes. Which remember, we've seen that the attributes actually are in the shape of a man that relate to men. You have the intellect, you have chesed, kindness is the right arm, gvura, strength, might, restraint is the left arm, the torso is tiferes, harmony, beauty, that kind of stuff, and etc. going on. So this body is what God created to interact with the world. It exists in many different dimensions and many different levels. But ultimately, this body, as in this attributes, you have the highest level of Atzilus, which is so high up, it's not even considered like a created entity. Then you have the world to come after that. Bria, Yitzira, Asiya. Which, if you remember from the Mechamocha Maamar, remember we went backwards and we say, oh, down here we have foliage. But if you go high enough up, it's angels. And you go even higher than that, etc. Like we've described water. Water is something that's an attribute of chesed, which is kindness. On one level, it looks like this. One level looks like this. You go to another level, it's Malach Michal, the archangel of kindness, which would be water. But even he, where does he come? Higher up than that is what chesed is. Remember we said like the red-blooded animals. They're in the chariot. Certain kind of angel in the chariot. Go higher than that, they get the rooster. They go higher than that, they get the angel Gabriel. Go higher than that, you get the attribute of Gevura. So all of those are the clothing that this body manifests in. So ultimately down here, you're starting off with a one thing and it branches out into all different things, all different creations that could trace back up to a single attribute, which traces back up to God himself. I expanded it a little bit. This is sort of what Eliyahu Navi is describing. That these attributes are a body for God to interact with us in the world, because we can't interact with God straight. So we need some sort of interface, which is what the body is. And that body has different clothings. And the way Eliyahu Navi describes is that this body goes into the different worlds. And each world, that body's going to end up looking differently because it's the clothing that's going to give it a certain look. So clothing can reveal or conceal according to what it is. The lower down we go, the more the body is kind of concealed. So it's very tznius in this world. This world is the body is the most tznius because it's the most covered up. But ultimately everything within this world we know traces back to these attributes, which is God operating through this body. So that's why the body is part of God, but it's not really God. He operates through it, but he's not defined by it. This is all the kind of stuff that Eliyahu Navi describes about how Ma works within the world. We saw the idea that the Tanya explains to us that the soul and the brain makes everything in the body alive at the same time, but at the same time it gives the power to each individual thing. So it goes back to the same idea. The wholeness essence contains the potential for all parts in it, but you're not going to see the parts until you start branching out from it. Essentially, what we're saying is that we think we're separate entities, but in reality, we're still interconnected to each other. We saw with Rambam talking about the highly matter that the Greeks were talking about. There was a substance that was created. From there, the separate entities came into being, etc. So why is all this important to know? Because what we're getting to is that, yes, we think we're separate entities, but we're actually not. We're interrelated entities, which means someone rejects somebody else out of hatred, especially baseless hatred, they're actually rejecting a part of their own self. And what that is like is that they're severing a part of themselves. Which, by the way, if you remember even from Tanya that we spoke, this is a body that God chose to put a Jewish soul into. You're going to reject that. You're going to reject someone, anyone that God has created. Well, here specifically we're talking about Jewish people, but you're going to reject someone who God specifically created. You're saying, no thanks. What is going on here? And that's why it connects it to sacrifice, which connects to the idea of prayer. Prayer we know we have now in the place of sacrifice. The thing with sacrifice is that the Kohen who brought the sacrifice and the sacrifice that were brought ought to be perfect and complete. If there was a blemish or defect, it could not be brought. If the person had a blemish or defect, they are not allowed to bring the sacrifice. So we say a sacrifice has to be complete. Prayer is like a sacrifice. To be able to start prayer, you have to take upon yourself the Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel. What is the Mitzvas Ahavas Yisroel? Is that I accept and embrace every single interrelated part of myself. So if a person rejects somebody else out of hatred, they're severing a part of themselves, which now creates a defect, a blemish, and now you cannot stand before God at this time that represents the sacrifices. You're going to come before God, and God's going to be like, hey, part of you is missing. What's going on here? How are you going to answer that? I rejected this person you specifically created. I severed him. No, this doesn't work. So that's why we say that it is underlying the entire Torah, because the entire Torah is facilitating, teaching us about the ultimate unity of everything. Creating a separation, God forbid, defies that, undoes that, goes against what that entire mantra is, that there's a spiritual dimension uniting all of us. That's one aspect. The second thing that we have is, why did Hillel phrase the mitzvah in the negative terminology instead of the positive terminology? As in, why did he say what's hateful to you, don't do unto others? He should have said it more like, love someone like yourself. And that's where we got to the idea of that a person doesn't find fault in himself. As in, when you have a character fault, a character blemish, defect, or something, when it's you, you figure out how to live with it. You figure out how to be okay with it. It doesn't always awaken this intense emotional state within you. Versus somebody else who, when they do something, it's like, why do you have to be like this? Well, what about you? But it says, what's hateful to you, don't do to somebody else. And it says a person doesn't recognize faults within themselves, the same way that you figure out how to live with your faults, the same way you figure out how to kind of cover them over and make them not as bad, and you soften the edges of it a little bit, that's what you should be doing for somebody else. What's hateful to you, as in, when you hate so much, when somebody else calls out one of your faults, they verbalize it, sounds worse when you said it out loud. You're not mad at them because they're wrong. It's not that they made a mistake. It's not that the character flaw doesn't exist. You're mad at them for verbalizing it and bringing it to the open. That's what you hate so much. And that's what you get upset at. So the same way that you hate it when somebody else does that, you don't do that either. And not just that, the way you soften the edges for yourself, because your own self-love is going to make it seem not as bad, so you don't get into a great emotional state from it. That's what you should be doing for somebody else. That even if you see it and you recognize that this is what they have in them, you don't have to always be verbalizing it, especially if it's not a time for us to be doing character building right now. You don't always have to be verbalizing it. And I just say your self-love, your love for somebody else should be softening the edges. That's also going back to the idea of interrelation, because loving somebody else is loving your own self. So real self-love is extending love to somebody who is an interrelated part of you. That's why we saw the idea that even the raging waters cannot extinguish it. And that brought us to the idea of also, why did Hillel say this is the entire Torah? Because a person who's going to call out and do the severing, God forbid, is creating division. The purpose of the entire Torah is to create a unity between different aspects of God. The level of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is Kucha Brichu, and the level of Malchus, which is the source of the Jewish souls. Because the level of Malchus is what creates male and the feminine aspect. That's why before davening, we have the same Yechud Kucha Brichu, Shechinte, the Achtash, Shem Yudke, Bevavke, B'chodesh Shlem Shem Kol Yisrael. People could theoretically be saying this before many mitzvahs. In the Chabad Center, we say before davening to say everything that we're doing, the intent of it is to unite this aspect of God, that's the Kucha Brichu, which is Zah, the 6 attributes, with Malchus. We want to create a unity, a complete alignment between everything. To say that unity amongst ourselves is what facilitates unity up above. Okay, this is from Bava Metzia. So this is from the Gemara. It's talking about someone whose name is Rabbi Yochanan, who is known for really, really ridiculously good looking. With regard to Rabbi Yochanan's physical features, the Gemara adds that Rabbi Yochanan said, I alone remain of the beautiful people of Yerushalayim. The Gemara continues. Obviously, we're in the middle of a discussion here. One who wishes to see something resembling the beauty of Rabbi Yochanan should bring a new shiny silver goblet from the smithy and fill it with red pomegranate seeds, parsidaya, and place a diadem of red roses upon the lip of the goblet and position it between the sunlight and shade. That luster is a semblance of Rabbi Yochanan's beauty. The Gemara asks, is that so? Was Rabbi Yochanan so beautiful? But doesn't the master say the beauty of Rav Kahana is a semblance of the beauty of Rabbi Abahu? The beauty of Rabbi Abahu is a semblance of the beauty of Yaakov, our forefather. And the beauty of Yaakov, our forefather, is a semblance of the beauty of Adam, the first man. That's being underlined here because that's we're looking at. This terminology is called Shofred Yaakov. The beauty of Yaakov, as in Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, resembles the beauty of Adam, the first man, who was so perfect and everything, was the most ridiculously good looking of all of them, created in the image of God. This is just to add, and yet Rabbi Yochanan is not included in this list. It says here Rav Kahana and Rabbi Abahu and Yaakov and Adam. Rabbi Yochanan is not included in this list. The Gemara answers Rabbi Yochanan is different from these other men as he did not have a beauty of countenance, as in he did not have a beard. Probably that he couldn't grow a beard is what I'm assuming. He wouldn't deliberately not have a beard. If you remember the story of Reish Lakish, he was a bandit chief. You see somebody bathing in the river, someone who's so ridiculously good looking. So, I don't know, he went swinging across, whatever to go, and then he realizes that it's a man. Rabbi Yochanan is the one that he saw. This Rabbi Yochanan. So the Rabbi Yochanan sees what he did. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, well, this strength belongs to the Torah. And Reish Lakish says, well, your beauty belongs to a woman. And Rabbi Yochanan says, funny you mention that. I have a sister. She's beautiful. If you agree to change your ways, if you agree to study Torah, then I'll set you guys up. And Reish Lakish becomes a great sage, and he's quoted in the Gemara. So Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan end up becoming brothers-in-law. He taught him Torah, and he makes him into a sage. I added that whole part in, but really the line that we're looking at is this thing of Shofred Yaakov, that Yaakov's beauty was a semblance of Adam's beauty. As Yaakov resembled Adam, so they say that Yaakov Avinu, as in our forefather Yaakov, actually looked like Adam. As Yaakov resembled Adam, the souls of all the Jewish people were incorporated within Yaakov. So the same way that Adam is this Neshama Klal, so Yaakov also was, who thus resembled the beauty of Adam Elyon, sublime man, which in this case we're talking about Zah, on his throne. Yaakov looked like Adam, as in if Yaakov is like Adam, that means Yaakov also is this composite, this all-encompassing soul neshama klalis, which means that all the Jewish souls are also all within Yaakov. All to say that we all of us together, resemble this perfect man. What are we talking about? The sublime man on his throne. This is from the chariot of Ezekiel, of Yecheskel. This is part of when he's describing what he saw. Mimal Kiash ala Rosham, and above the expanse that was over their heads, like the appearance of a sapphire stone, was the likeness of a throne, and on the likeness of the throne was the likeness like the appearance of a man upon it above. So part of the whole chariot thing that he's seeing, he sees by an interesting sapphire, that the throne was a sapphire throne. The luchos, the tablets, were also sapphire. And he sees the appearance of a likeness of a man on the sapphire throne. That's what it's eventually correlating us to. Like the appearance of the rainbow that is in the cloud on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. That was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of Havaya, and when I saw it, I fell on my face and I heard a voice speaking. The appearance of the likeness of a man on the throne, here is saying, it's equating it to a godly image. Beauty like this, beauty like this, beauty like this, eventually gets us over here. We're making a correlation that we are resembling this ultimate image. This is from Parshas Hazinu, just from the book of Devarim. Because Havaya's portion is his people, Yaakov the lot of his inheritance. It says portion, the portion as in we are all part of Havaya. That we're all part of, here we're looking at this ultimate image of man. Thus, Hashem's spiritual qualities are mirrored in his people. When the souls of the Jewish people unite, he is united. As in, when we are united down above, there's a unity and alignment of these aspects of God that are also in perfect alignment. And here it's talking about specifically Zah, which are the 6 attributes. There, Anpin, remember the small face? Zah, the 6 attributes, align with Malchus, which is the last of the attributes. But Malchus becomes the top of the next, like a chain. The bottom of one becomes the top of the other. Malchus is where the Shekhinah is. It's the source of the Jewish people. Because we resemble God, etc., when we have unity down here, there's unity up above. Perfect alignment for everything. And that would be Kujabricha and Shekhinah. These 2 aspects. We want full alignment. That means that everything is in the harmony that it's supposed to be in. All the flows and everything are working the way they're supposed to. So Zah Malchus, which is the source of the Jewish people. So Hashem and Israel become one. We are united, and he is united. We create a unity now, us and him. Capital H. Us and God would create a perfect alignment within all of us. At which point, sublime man sees no blemishes within himself, which would be created by the faults of the Jewish people, overlooked because of the unity, and Hashem removes every transgression of Israel, command Mitzvosecha biyama rabba, like one who cleanses in the mighty ocean. As in, when there's perfect unity between us and God, and we're correlating this idea of this having this perfect sublime man image. So the same way that we, on our own self, see no fault within ourselves, when we have this perfect unity, sublime man, the perfect ultimate, also sees no blemishes within himself. Obviously, God doesn't have any blemishes, but when we have perfect alignment, us with God, the perfect unity with us and God, if we're creating blemishes within ourselves, God forbid, if we have mistakes, faults within ourselves, then that's going to affect on this level of the unity. But when there's perfect harmony, then the self-love is going to override. So that way, the sublime man is not going to see the faults. He's not going to notice because a person doesn't see fault within themselves. The self-love overrides it. Versus if, God forbid, there's disunity, then the same way that you see faults in somebody else, intellectual awareness creates an emotional state, anger or annoyance or whatever it is. Disunity allows for that. Unity does not, because unity means that we're all becoming a whole one-selfness, and thereby, self-love overrides that. I see no fault within myself. And literally at that level, God sees no faults. And it's like he cleanses all the transgressions. From Parshas Balak, Bilam said, Lo bit avim b'Yaakov, lo ra ama b'Yisrael, havaya al-kav, imo sruas melech bo. He beholds no sin in Yaakov and sees no wrongdoing in Israel. Havaya al-kav, havaya is in his, Elohim is with him, and he has the king's friendship. To say, just as physical man doesn't see his own faults, when the Jewish people are united with the sublime man, as we've seen what the sublime man is, their faults, quote unquote, become his. And one doesn't notice his own fault. He beholds no sin and sees no wrongdoing doesn't mean the faults are concealed from him. For everything is revealed and known to him, even trivial conversation. What we're going to get to is that the point is not that God doesn't know that we're imperfect. The point is that self-love overrides, so you don't see the imperfection in the sense that it softens the edges. Something that I can figure out how to live with. The same way that we do for our own self, when we have perfect union with God, that's the condition, that's the state that God allows to exist within the whole relationship as a whole. And that happens only when there's complete unity. When we have unity, we create the unity between us and God. That's complete unity like that. And what we mean by unity, the underlying that is Ahavas Yisroel. So when I overlook for somebody else, this is what God does also. That overlooks for us on our level down here. So now we're seeing also why, when Hillel's saying this, what's hateful for you, don't do to somebody else. And that's the whole Torah. We can see why there's so many elements that's so important to it. Not creating the division. That's why it's in the negative. But also, you can say this entire Torah because that is the point of the whole Torah. Is creating the unity between us and God. To have a wholeness on this sort of level. And we see what the benefits of all that is.